Hello, I'm Angus Scott, and this is the Debrief. The transfer window is closed. The first international break is over. We are back in the thick of things. But one thing hasn't changed: Manchester United. Still losing, still troubled, and still up for sale. Are the Glazers really going to sell the club, or is this just a massive ruse, some free publicity, some self-aggrandization for the unpopular family running the club? Well, that's our debate today. What on earth is going on at Old Trafford? Of course, Fabrizio Romano will also be giving us the latest from his red-hot phone, so stand by for that. And Ben Jacobs, as ever, is with me. All transfer windows are now closed, Ben, so you've got your takeover hat on now.
Yes, and I've had a bit more sleep as well. Not enough sleep, though, to understand what starting the podcast. I think I need a thesaurus if I'm going to keep up with you.
I don't know what it was. I had to look it up myself, but I think it's aggrandization. I still can't say it. Anyway, I'm also pleased to say that Bloomberg's David Hellier, who's a business reporter, is here, and he's all over the football takeover world. David, welcome to the Debrief. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Well, tell us, David, what is your feeling about what has been going on over the last 9 months or so? Are the Glazers really wanting to sell the club?
I mean, good question. I mean, I suppose we have to say which Glazers, and there's 6 of them, and I think one of the complexities of the whole deal is that they're not necessarily united in what they want. But I'm still being told, even this morning, that the process is going on. Rain, the bank that's selling Man United, or attempting to sell it, is briefing that the process is definitely still going on. That the club hasn't been taken off the market, as was reported a couple of weeks ago. But I do think I think. I mean, to a certain extent, rain is the cause of a lot of this delay, I think, because right at the beginning, they managed to persuade the Glazers to put the United up for sale by saying, I mean, these were different times, and that Chelsea had just been sold, and United's the biggest club possibly in the world. They managed to persuade the Glazers that they could quite easily get them £6 billion for equity holding, and that there was going to be a stream of bidders like there were for Chelsea, and of course it hasn't quite turned out like that. There is demand. That United, there's only one United, and there are 2 potential buyers at least, but it's more complicated than they thought to get this £6 billion, and I think we're not there yet in terms of the bidders haven't bid as high as the Glazers want. And so that's kind of exacerbating the differences that there are within the Glazer family.
So is that the hold-up, do you feel? Is it a price that's the biggest hold-up here?
I mean, that's what I'm strongly told by lots of different sources, that they want a price which is nearer to the £6 billion than either the Qataris or Jim Ratcliffe's group can is willing to go to at the moment.
Ben, the 2 main players, they're stalling then at this £6 billion figure, whether it's pounds or dollars that the Glazers want.
Yeah, I think what we've had is a series of bids, and Rain Group's role is not to mediate or ultimately help the groups in any way. It's to get the highest possible price for the Glazer family. So I think we have to look at what's happening, as David alluded to, in 2 different ways. Number one, the Glazers are still determined sellers, but number 2, for the right price. And when you don't get the right price, which hasn't happened to date, you have a scenario where the S in Glazers becomes highly important, because suddenly they're 6 siblings and they're not as united as they would be if they were to get the right price. Now, what that right price is the crux of this entire debate, because I think the process started, to my understanding, with a promise, almost in inverted commas, of somewhere, as David alludes to, of around £6 billion or $7 billion is actually the number that I've personally heard. And you enter into the process in light of Chelsea, hoping to get that. You don't get it. And then Rain's job is to create competitive tension to try and raise the bids, raise the price, because otherwise the Glazers may choose to move in a different direction. And that different direction might be staying for longer. It might be trying to do a more flexible deal and structure with Sir Jim Ratcliffe. It might be taking minority investment, or it might be ultimately a no sale and putting the club on the market at a future date when the Glazers then feel like the club will be worth more. So I still think that for all of the drama and for all of the length so far that this saga has taken, it is still quite simple, frustrating, but simple, because if the right numbers hit, 6 Glazers want to sell. If the right number isn't hit, that's when we get some lack of unity, and that's where we're at the moment.
David, I mean, from your experience, we're looking at 9 months, if that is the figure that this club has been up for sale. In big business terms, obviously it's a huge takeover. Is this an ordinary amount of time, or is this being stretched out?
I think it's not extraordinary, and there are deals that go into months, and then there's sort of Monopolies Commission reviews, and there's all sorts of hold-ups. But the difference here is this is being played out. It's being played out on the front pages of newspapers, on the top of TV broadcasts sometimes, or just via fan channels, and there's just so much noise about it that I think it seems longer than it actually is. I think sometimes with an industrial deal, it would go quiet for a few months, and you wouldn't really hear about it, and then things would take their course. The reviews would be done, clearances would be given, and then you'd have a deal completed in 9-10 months, but you wouldn't think, wow, that just took so long. So I think it's all, the delays have all been amplified. It's like we've got a decision where we've got a deadline, and the deadline passes, and you expect a decision, and then it's almost like we've got a VAR process going on. It's all being reviewed and looked at several times, and the joyous expectation of a resolution is taken away from you.
VAR is bad, but this is the worst VAR decision, isn't it?
This goes on for months.
Yes.
So I think I don't think it's extraordinarily long, but it is long, and I mean, for what seems, people keep saying to me, the bankers keep saying it's an extraordinarily complex process. So I'm not sure it is any more complex than than other industrial takeovers, but but there are issues that make it very difficult. I mean, the main one being the 6 sellers rather than one united seller. And you've got a buyer that in Qataris that one assumes has got the money. It's not like they haven't got the money, I assume, although we don't know for sure. But doesn't really want to pay as much as the Glazers want. And then you've got another buyer that probably hasn't easily got the money, who is very disciplined through necessity, who's also come up with a structure that isn't. It's not attractive to all the shareholders in Manchester United. So you then have, Ratcliffe is a bit constrained by the fact that a number of shareholders of Man United have threatened to sue the board if they recommend his bid, because it doesn't offer them an exit for their shareholdings. So in a sense, Rain doesn't have the tension of having 2 bidders bidding against each other. There's, at the moment. Unless Ratcliffe changes his structure, they haven't got that tension. So I think, to me, that's why. I don't know exactly how that story in the Mail the other day came to pass. But I suspect that it's also it does increase the tension a bit, which is altogether missing at the moment. By saying, if we don't get what we want, we'll take it off the market altogether. And by the way, in a few years' time, it's going to be worth 10 billion. That kind of does create a little bit of tension. which has been absent.
Yeah, I think the two bids are very different, like you say. So it's been difficult for Rain Group to create competitive tension. I think the other thing is that a lot of fans are looking at the Chelsea sale, which was handled by Rain Group, and they feel like somehow it should be as quick as that. But we shouldn't forget that was under extraordinary circumstances. It had to be a super speed sale because Chelsea's license was ultimately expiring, and Roman Abramovich had no control over that process, or very little, whereas the Glazers can be as slow or as fast as they like. But David, just briefly before we go to Fabrizio, I want to get your take as a financial journalist specifically on the club being listed on the New York Stock Exchange, because what we've seen throughout the process is a lot of people, fans and media in particular, react to the stock market either surging or diving based upon stories in the media or indications within the industry that something is happening. And most recently, after those reports that the Glazers might not sell, we saw a record fall for a single day. The market value of the club lost over 550 million. The share price fell by 21% at one point during the day, and in the end, it had dipped by 18%. Can we read anything into this, or ultimately do those playing the stock market know very little of what's actually going on behind the scenes?
I mean, I would say that it's quite a negative chain of events for football clubs that want to be listed on the stock market. I mean, it's generally, I mean, there was a wave of them that were listed in the 90s, and aside from Man United and Juventus and Dortmund, there are very few clubs that are listed. And I think one of the problems is that they're not really that suitable to be publicly listed companies in many ways, because I think they attract unsophisticated investors. Not only unsophisticated investors, obviously some very sophisticated investors there, but there's quite a high potential for people to lose money without really knowing what they're getting themselves into. So I think this has been a fairly challenging affair for the listing authorities in New York. Doesn't really come across as a positive thing for New York listings environment. That such sort of variations of share price and value can happen in a day or less than that, on a sort of rumor. So whether investors really know what much about it and how sophisticated they are. I mean, some are, some of the very sophisticated hedge funds, but again, I mean, I think with football clubs, I mean, there's so much interest, amongst fans, and such an appetite in the media and on fan channels, and dare I say on podcasts as well, that whatever we say, I mean, Rio Ferdinand said something, and I think it led to a big movement in the share price. I'm not sure he had very precise financial information, but it's a difficult issue really for the regulators and for the club itself.
You were talking about the 1990s there, David, when people got involved, and I remember your club, Chelsea, being listed, and I bought some shares in Chelsea.
Chelsea
foolishly.
Village or something.
Yeah, that's it, Chelsea Village, when Ken Bates was there, and I can remember ringing up Ken one day and asking for an interview, because we needed an interview on something when I was working in London. London Tonight I was working on at the time. And he flatly said no. And I said, yeah, but I'm a shareholder, Ken. And he said, I don't give a toss if you're a shareholder or not.
Yeah.
So it didn't serve me very well. Anyway, but I get what you mean. These inexperienced investors, albeit we didn't have a large percentage of Chelsea Village at the time. With that in mind, people doing business in transfer markets and likewise. Let's bring in Fabrizio Romano at this stage, because we know that Manchester United were very busy during that transfer window, and we'll get Fab's take on what's been going on at Old Trafford now. Fabrizio, thanks as ever for joining us. We're talking Manchester United this week. What's your latest feeling about the takeover?
My feeling is that at the moment, all the parties involved don't want to comment about that because, honestly, what happened is really still surprising. We remember the feeling from all parties about things being advanced in February, in March, in April, in May. So the expectation was to complete this takeover before the beginning of the summer transfer window, and we are still at the same point. So all parties are now nervous. The situation is not that easy. And so all the parties that were commenting, like in February, March, April, with many briefs and updates, now they don't want to comment about that, and I think is probably the best news for Manchester United fans to keep things quiet as possible around this process, seeing how slow was that in the past few months. So at the moment, nothing imminent, nothing confirmed, but the feeling of sources is that things are still happening behind the scenes of this story. So let's see. At the moment, again, nothing concrete, and all parties want to keep things quiet and secret. But again, the feeling is that there is still something going on behind the scenes.
Was there anything in the window that was overshadowed by what the Glazers are doing? Maybe players didn't want to go to United or were fine by it, but anything that overshadowed the transfer market for United?
No, I think, look, maybe with the takeover, they had a chance to go for superstars players. For example, I remember before the summer transfer window, we had many links with players like Harry Kane or Victor Osimhen. These kind of players were linked with Manchester United, and at the end, it was not possible for Man United because of the financial situation to go and sign players worth more than 110 million euros, like in the case of Harry Kane, and for Osimhen, it was probably 150 million euros. So probably that was the issue. I remember that before the summer transfer window, there were links with that kind of players, but then the reality is that Man United had to go for different kind of players with different kind of strategy because of the financial situation and also because of the financial fair play. So I think it was just about that. I don't have any news about players rejecting Man United because of the takeover. I think this is something that happens in football to have a potential change of ownership, but in this case, I think the issue was just with superstars players. But at the end, what I can say is that Man United are very happy with the summer transfer window they had. They signed the players they wanted, and so they didn't see an issue about that, honestly.
So they're happy with someone like Rasmus Højlund, who, look, has now made his debut, but is not in the same class as, though, Osimhen that you mentioned, or Harry Kane.
No, they're very happy with him. They're very happy with him because they believe that the potential of Rasmus Højlund is to arrive at that level, at the level of super strikers. So he's a very young guy. He had just one season in Serie A with Atalanta, and he was coming from Stuttgart. So it will take time. And the message from Manchester United and from Erik ten Hag also to the teammates when he joined the club was something like, we have to wait for him, to give him time because the potential is incredible, but it's something different to play with Manchester United compared to Atalanta or Stuttgart, with all the respect. So it's completely different environment, pressure, and they know that, but they're very happy with him. They believe that he's a very serious guy, professional guy, again, with an incredible talent. Honestly, they were very happy also with his debut. He was a bit unlucky with the goal disallowed and also in some moments of the game. But again, they believe he's the perfect player also for the idea of Erik ten Hag, to have that kind of striker, fast, who can help also in being an hard worker with the team. So they believe that they got a very, very good player.
Let's move away from Old Trafford and some deals that have gone through latterly. Verratti, Draxler to Al Ahly in Qatar. Now, clearly, the Qatar link between the two clubs.
Yes, this is very clear, but at the same time, I think the fee for Marco Verratti is a very normal fee. To pay 45 million euros for one of the best midfielders in Europe is something absolutely normal. I'm still surprised that top European clubs didn't go for Marco Verratti because they had the opportunity to go for him. And I see some midfielders around Europe were not at the level of players like Marco Verratti, so they probably needed that kind of player, but it could be about the salary. He had a very good salary at Paris Saint-Germain, and so probably for many European clubs, it's complicated to offer that kind of salary with financial fair play for a player who is not that young. So probably that was the issue, but PSG believed that 45 million euros is a very normal fee for a player like Marco Verratti, with the quality of Marco Verratti. and he's not that old. So they believe that this is a very normal fee. And for Julian Draxler, it was an opportunity to leave Paris Saint-Germain. Honestly, he was desperate because this summer there were not so many options for him after a complicated season at Benfica. So this opportunity to go to Qatar. The deal was signed today in the morning. Yesterday they agreed on the final terms. He completed the medical test. In the morning today, he completed the agreement in terms of signing the contracts. And so for Paris Saint-Germain, it was crucial to get rid of as many players as possible this summer, and they made it happen.
Yes, Verratti only 30, Draxler 29. Still a lot of football left in those two. Okay, Chelsea struggling for goals. Fab, what do you think? Do you think they'll move for a striker in January?
It's too early, honestly. Speaking to Chelsea, when they are asked about that, obviously, I think it's very normal for them to say that their focus is on the current squad. Is more than 3 months, so they want to keep things quiet around the squad. They want to protect also Nicolas Jackson, who had a very good preseason, but then in Premier League is not the same, and so they want to back him. They trust him, and the idea of Chelsea is to protect Nico Jackson because they know that probably with Christopher Nkunku in the preseason, in the initial games of the preseason, he was performing a super lever because having a player like Nkunku was crucial also for him to help with the movements, to bring more quality, different kind of balls available for Jackson in the box. So that's why they believe that once Christopher Nkunku will be back, the whole situation, the attacking players, is going to be different because he was the crucial player for Mauricio Pochettino. And so at the moment, they're not commenting about any striker opportunity. They had the chance to sign some strikers in the summer, like Dusan Vlahovic, but Chelsea were never 100% convinced about going for a traditional number 9. So I think they will keep protecting that idea at least for the next 1-2 months, and then we will see what they decide at the end of November, beginning of December. But at the moment, Chelsea are not actively working on a new striker because they want to protect the squad they have.
And Ivan Toney may be a name that would come up in Chelsea conversations. There are other clubs looking at him as well.
Yes, I think it's normal when you have this kind of opportunity, and I think Toney is going to leave Brentford in 2024 100%. So that's the feeling of those close to him. Let's see if it's going to be January or summer transfer window, depending on the proposals. But the player is going to leave and is going to try a different experience. So Chelsea have an interest, but they've always been following this player and tracking this player. There are also other clubs in England, and not just in England. For example, I'm told that some Italian clubs sent multiple times last year their scouts to follow Toney with Brentford. So has always been a player appreciated by many clubs. Of course, England looks like the most likely destination also because he wants to stay in Premier League and continue in Premier League. So Chelsea, yes, but not only Chelsea. But to be honest, at the moment, it's not something advanced or concrete. I see his name always linked with many clubs around the top 6 because obviously it's an opportunity, but I think it will take some time to understand which club will go for him with proper money and trying to convince Brentford. I think this is going to be probably December, not before December.
Okay, we've got the Champions League coming right up. Looking at some of the sides in that competition, look at Newcastle at the moment. There's always been a slight doubt about if their squad is big enough. Do we expect to see reinforcements come in there?
It's a possibility. I think it will depend on what happens with the Champions League group, if they will go to the knockout stages phase or not. So if they go to Europa League or not, in that group, you never know what's going to happen. They can win the group or they can be at the last position of the group because it's the most difficult group probably in the Champions League this season. So at the moment, they are not planning for anything specific. Their main focus is now on the new contract of Bruno Guimaraes. They really want to get this new deal done. As I said 2 weeks ago, it's really close, but it's not done or completed yet. So they're working on the final details of this Bruno contract. And then for January, I think it will depend if it's going to be Champions League football, Europa League football, how's going to be the situation also in the domestic cups. These are going to be crucial factors to see if Newcastle will invest in new players or not. But in any case, I'm sure that Newcastle will not go for any panic buy. This is not in their style. They only sign players when they believe that he's 100% the right player for their project. And so this is going to be the way also in the January transfer window.
I mean, that's the same for Pep Guardiola at Manchester City. Do we feel that he's got the squad that he wants? Because we know how difficult it is to defend, well, certainly 3 titles is extremely difficult. Is there anything else they feel, to win the Champions League again?
I think no. I think they're very happy with the squad they have. They signed Mateus Nunes. They had the players they wanted, including Jeremy Doku. And Pep Guardiola is very happy with Doku to have a player with that skills. fast player, skillful. So this is what he wanted from the summer transfer window. And of course, he also got Guardiola to help in the defense. So at the moment, they are very happy with the squad they have. And I can guarantee that they are not working on any winter transfer window deal, because they believe that the squad is good enough to compete on all the competitions. Then let's see what happens with the injuries. Let's see what happens also with the Kevin De Bruyne recovery, because that is going to be a crucial point to understand what happens at Man City. But they believe that in the next months, Kevin will be back. The squad will be absolutely ready to compete in all competitions.
Fab, as ever, it's great that you joined us. Thanks very much indeed. We'll speak to you next week.
Thank you, and see you soon. Thank you. Ciao.
Ben, bearing in mind what Fabrizio has just said, how do you feel that the takeover or lack of takeover affected their work during the transfer window?
Well, I think the uncertainty had a huge effect, because let's not forget, both Sheikh Jassim and Sir Jim Ratcliffe started this process with a feeling that they could be in either before the end of the season, which sounds crazy now in hindsight, or certainly by the window opening. So a lot of the groups were planning for the summer and thinking if they were going to win, then they'd be able to impact that window. And of course, if Sheikh Jassim had come in and cleared the debt, that would have helped the finances as well. Maybe Manchester United would have been able to spend even more. So you can definitely make an argument that the uncertainty has impacted the window. And yet, if you just look at the finances, Manchester United spent a little bit more healthily than maybe we first anticipated, even though they have to think about financial fair play. So the two things really heading into the window that were most important for Manchester United was qualifying for Champions League football, which they did, and then staying within financial fair play, which they also believe that they did as well. And when you look at the money spent on Rasmus Højlund and Mason Mount and Andre Onana and Sofian Amrabat coming in as well late in the window, it's a healthy spend for Manchester United. So I don't think that we can say either of the two groups would have spent dramatically more, but they might have spent differently, and they might have managed the situation differently as well in terms of Manchester United's hierarchy, which is another thing. So the aim, for example, of both Ineos and 9-2 Foundation was, and we have to say now that it's past tense, to come in, the window to open. The summer's the best transition for a takeover, as we saw with Clearlake Bowley at Chelsea, to do a 100-day review and then decide on things like a sporting director, a different infrastructure, who might stay, who might go at the club. And all of that means that hypothetically, if either of the groups had been in on day one of the summer transfer window, by the end of it, we might have seen a different story. But still, again, within those two key things of Champions League football's the plus, you can spend a bit more. Financial fair play's the negative. It constrains what Manchester United could spend. So I think that fans will feel like Manchester United's mediocre start to the season is somehow linked to the takeover, or lack of it at this point. But I do feel like there are some other considerations that would have ultimately constricted a new group coming in as well. And the big one is that financial fair play element.
David, how do you feel this resolves itself?
I still think ultimately that the Qataris will come up with a bit more money. I mean, that's my instinct. I think the Glazers will become increasingly pressured to start on the investment that they need to do in the stadium and the training grounds. I think it's dangerous to keep putting it off. I think there's a sense of drift at the club. Internally, there's a lot of pressure on them, I think, to sell it or to resolve the situation. Even if that means one or two of them stay in somehow. With a minority shareholding. I mean, that's still my instinct. I mean, on behalf of the Qataris, I mean, we were being told a few weeks ago that it was very close, but maybe it's not as close as they would like, and that they're not going to pay as much as the Glazers want, but I think they will, in the end, come up a little bit. I feel with Ratcliffe, I don't really feel it happening, but I think they were at pains this morning to say that they're still in it, and it's always possible. But I think it just feels to me as if it will change hands. within the next,
Ben,
sort of 2
Ben,
weeks.
you and I know. Look, we know Qatar quite well and how they work, and you're still very well connected out there. We also know that even though they have buckets of cash, which they do, they can be very controlled about the way they spend it. But to get a trophy prize like Manchester United would be huge for them. And is your sense that maybe that they will come in with a little bit extra as well?
Well, I think we have to be clear. 9-2 Foundation have said many times their last bid was their final bid, so it's take it or leave it. But that is part of the games of the process. They said that after their third and fourth bids as well, and they went up once again. So we're now at a situation where both groups are in the same ballpark. It's just that you have 9-2 Foundation, who are slightly north of £5 billion and won 100% of the club, and Ratcliffe's club valuation is similar, but he's obviously paying less if he's successful because he's not buying 100% of the club and he's being flexible. He's saying to the Glazers, if you want to stay, then great, we can have a staggered or laddered exit. And if you want to go now, he is prepared, to my knowledge, to buy 69% of the shares, which is all of the Glazers shares, but not all of the football club. But I think with Qatar, what's interesting is just, are they who they say they are? Because if they are linked to ultimately the Emir, if Nasser Al-Khalifi has been involved in some form of discussions, then ultimately this comes from the top. And that is my feeling. And yet we also hear that Sheikh Jassim is a private investor, is a Manchester United fan. So if he's only using his own wealth, then maybe he can't go higher. But if this is a coordinated effort from the government down with the blessing of the Emir, and it has to be in reality, because you don't do anything of this magnitude in Qatar without the Emir knowing about it, without Nasser Al-Khalifi being involved as a consultant, then why haven't they already just paid what it takes to buy the football club? And I think you can come up with a few theories. One is just that it's complicated because the real people doing the deal are distant at this point and will stay distant until they've won. And there's definitely been frustration with Rain Group as to who they're dealing with. I don't think that Sheikh Jassim has been involved in any direct conversations. He didn't turn up in person in Manchester. The Glazers went to Nasser Al-Khalifi. Why? Because they were dealing with intermediaries via Rain Group, and it was unclear who 9-2 Foundation were. So that's a factor maybe slowing things down. And then I think, David, the other thing I wanted to ask you just briefly is whether the collapse of Credit Suisse has had anything to do with this. Could you make an argument, David, that Qatar came to the table with a coordinated effort from the top down? QSI, for example, say they weren't involved, but QIA were definitely involved before they bid in some kind of conversation. So we know that there's senior deal makers involved. But is there a possibility that those same senior deal makers and those same government officials, because of the financial climate, because of the length of time, maybe because they feel the Glazers might not sell, have sort of backed off and left Sheikh Jassim in a little bit of limbo? And could the Credit Suisse collapse have anything to do with that?
Yeah, I must admit, I'm not aware that has. I mean, one of my colleagues is very well sourced on, the deal makers on the Qatari side, and I mean, he's not said that is a big factor. I think what is a big factor is the sort of general investment climate, which has deteriorated since the Chelsea deal. So that might be playing a little bit of might be an extra reason why the Qataris are cautious, and they're not going as high as the Glazers feel. I mean, the Credit Suisse collapse must play somewhere there, but I don't think it's a sort of I don't think it's a real impediment.
And what do you feel, David, in just wrapping up, will happen next? You think, your gut feeling is the Qataris will eventually take over. How long a process might this be? What happens next?
I mean, I hesitate to say next Friday, because I think I can't remember. I can't recall how many times I've been told there'll be an announcement on Friday. So I would have thought before Christmas, the next few weeks. I mean, I was always told August, September, nothing much is going to happen. But it still feels very quiet, I must say. But next few weeks, I think. But famous last words,
Ben,
because
yeah, we've heard it once or twice before. Ben,
yeah, exactly.
is that your feeling too? There is nothing imminent?
Not by takeover standards, no. I think that both groups have effectively, in a non-exclusive manner, and that's always been my understanding, that the process letters did not offer any exclusive negotiations. So we heard some reports that maybe we would get that. And it can be true, by the way, that a group can try and get that. So those reports are not incorrect in any way, because why wouldn't a group try and get exclusivity? It effectively puts them front of queue to complete the deal. But my understanding is that every round of bidding had a process letter. And in that process letter, it made it clear that exclusive negotiations would not be given. So we continue, my feeling is, in this pattern of non-exclusivity, with both groups effectively being treated already like a preferred bidder commonly associated with exclusivity. And they'll be put on the brink to complete a deal, to create maximum competitive tension, but also to be ready to go if the Glazers finally give either of the groups or another group a green light. And I think very simply, I would say my gut feeling, it is just my view, is that it will be Qatar or no sale, with Ratcliffe a very clear third. And there's not much to choose from talking to sources between Qatar or no sale. And there won't be unless Qatar go up in terms of their bid. So as David says, scenario one, I feel, will be that finally Qatar pays what it takes. And there's a very realistic chance that that will happen. And then it's the cleanest transaction in takeover terms. And from there, they'll be the new owners of Manchester United Football Club. And time-wise, I wouldn't want to put anything on it. But what I would say is now the summer window is shut, time is a little bit less important. Scenario number two is Qatar stick to their guns. They stay around that £5 billion mark. And the Glazers decide to go in a different direction. And I think that that could well be no sale, because as David's alluded to, it's very difficult with Ratcliffe and the structure that he's offered to please the Manchester United board. So unless Ratcliffe decides he wants to win at all costs, but he no longer wants control, so he's prepared to invest in a minority sense and maybe hope that over time, a bit like 49ers Enterprises at Leeds, he can go from minority to majority to control. Unless he pivots and moves away from what he's always said, which is control or nothing, it's harder to see how he's going to get a deal done. So I think Qatar or no sale, but at this stage, Qatar are going to have to go higher. Otherwise, we're going to remain in limbo, unfortunately. And I don't think that a lot is going to change.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's 3 votes for Qatar, really, or nothing at all. I think that's the only way for the club to go forward. And I have to say, knowing the way Qatar works, they often come out with the goods in the end. But again, we shall see. That is your football debrief this week. Many thanks to our guest, David Hellier from Bloomberg, and to Fabrizio Romano. Even when the window is closed, there's plenty of news to discuss with the guru, so he will be here every week. My thanks to Ben as well. Thank you for listening. We'll be back with your debrief next week.